thank you for joining us this Saturday morning. Now, on Wednesday, a 7-story building collapsed in Banana Island, Ikoyi, the most expensive piece of real estate in Lagos, or maybe even in Nigeria, who knows? And where one body was recovered from the rubble. I thought we heard that there were no deaths. About 25 were brought out alive.
You remember, if you looked at that video, you realize that while the building was coming down, there were people on top. At the very top, I saw movement at the very top of that, building while it was coming down. I can't even imagine.
Well, we're told that 25 people were rescued from the site, which the Lagos State Emergency Management Agency, LASEMA, scanned with a high-precision 3D laser imagery system for life and found no evidence of anyone trapped in the rubble.
Wow.
Well, would we like to believe that? Well, we're being joined this morning by the Chairman, Comprehensive Project Management Services Limited, CPMS, and past President, Association for Consulting Engineering in Nigeria, ACEN, Engineer Bayo Adeola. Good morning, Mr. Adeola. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, sir.
Sir, we find ourselves...
I wish it was under the circumstances we're discussing. I said I wish it was...
Can you hear us?
I can hear you, except that it breaks.
Okay, I'm pretty sure that we'll work on that,
okay.
Press to see more. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Adeola, unfortunately, we find ourselves at this point yet again, another collapsed building. The last major one we had also took the life of the developer. And we thought that with all the furore that raised, that these kinds of things we would not see again so soon. In your estimation, what are the reasons why these things keep occurring?
Okay. Okay, I was saying earlier on that I was wishing that my discussion with you will be under more pleasant circumstances when we will be discussing engineering contribution to development rather than another crisis or emergencies. The question you asked is fundamental. Why does it keep happening? The problem is that there's a systemic inefficiency in the construction, especially high-rise building delivery process. There is a systemic deficiency that cannot be attended to only by response at crisis alone. Indeed, the only permanent solution is what is done between crises. When you have one crisis, you study it in detail, and you respond to it systemically so that the gap between the last incident and the next one is much wider than the previous record. But that's really not what happens. What happens is that there's an intervention that is focused only on that particular collapse. Probes are done and things are done. But in terms of a systemic overhaul of the construction, especially building development process, really not much has been said to have been done in the past several years, and I'm talking about tens of years.
Wow.
The design process, the approval process, the construction process, the quality of the contractor, all the systemic things that have led to previous collapses are still present largely. And therefore, I think that we know where the problem is. The solution is a systemic attack on it by the totality of the stakeholder in that space, and that systemic attack on it might be triggered by a collapse like this, but it is the work that you do between now and how you are able to push away the next collapse as far as possible. Collapses will happen, but not in the frequency that they happen here, no.
Well, Engineer Adiola, you know, when you talked about system, it was part of what we also began to talk about, saying if the systems are in place to do the proper things, we will not have buildings collapsing, we will not have infrastructure decay, we will not even have, excuse me, the kind of abductions we had in about 9 years ago that saw to several others, you know, that followed it, both from the previous government and this one. So when you talk about systems collapse or system inefficiency or deficiency, you've mentioned, you've spaded them. Can you discuss the systems with us here this morning? From what to what is what supposed to happen in the building construction process? And where do we usually have the major weakness in the link?
Weak link.
I'll attempt to do it. Okay, you want to do a development, high-rise building, low-rise buildings, housing, whatever. There is the owner, whether it's a developer, whether it's an individual, whether it's an entity. He seeks the services of professionals, and there is a group of professionals that are there. The architect, the structural engineer, electrical, mechanical engineers, quantity surveyors, he seeks their services and they provide designs for him. These designs, architecture, structures, electrical, mechanical, are prepared. The competence with which these designs are prepared is the bedrock of future execution of it. If the designs have gaps, they're incompetent or they're inaccurate, then you have a problem in your hand. Once those designs are done by competent professionals, they're forwarded to the approval agencies, which is government, it's physical plan. And they check the layout, are you putting the right things in the right place? They check the architecture, do you meet the conditions for them? They check the structures. They didn't used to check the electrical and mechanical, but maybe they do now. They check the drawings and they give you approval on many layers. The planning, the planning requirements have been met, the architectural requirements have been met, the structural requirements have been met, and the engineering, like fire and all the other things, have been met. And when those things are considered to have been met by the approving authority, you get a planning approval. Then you go on and appoint a contractor to build it. The contractor is an assembly of different specialties. There's the core one who does the structural things, and it's the structural things that collapse. So in this process, the structural elements are key, and the contractor is expected to have competence in the construction of them. The consequences of the electrical will be fire, will be electrical shocks, will be other things. The consequences of the mechanical will be fire safety, will be the lifts and the water supply and all the distribution. So all the different engineering elements have impacts on the building. But the one that causes collapse is the structural element, which consists of the foundation and the superstructure. And the contractor is supposed to have competencies in executing all of these. It works with subcontractors who are specialists in the electrical, mechanical, and the different areas. While that construction is going on, the consultants are to provide supervision functions. Hopefully, at the end of most projects, you will have delivered a safe and sound building that can be used and that will not constitute risks to people. Those are really the elements, the basic blocks, building blocks that you go through in putting a building up.
Mr. Adela, are you saying that...
Yes.
Mr. Adela, are you saying that in cases of these high-rise collapses, that you're actually calling out the structural engineers as being responsible?
Let me put it very clearly.
Okay.
If a building collapses, there is a structural engineering failure somewhere. A building will not collapse because of architecture. A building will not collapse because the setback is adequate or not adequate. A building will not collapse because the electrical wiring has not been properly done. A building will collapse because either the foundation or any of the structural elements has failed. That is the primary cause of collapse. There are circumstances that can lead to that, but the primary cause of collapse of any building is a foundation or a structural failure in that building.
Okay.
And it can be shared by the structural engineer and the builder, the contractor.
Okay.
Between them, the immediate cause of collapse has to be traced to those specific focus areas. Did the structural engineer do anything wrong? Or did the contractor not comply strictly with the structural design and specifications? For whatever reasons. What circumstances that can cause this to happen might include quality of materials, imported steel, cement, but those are secondary things. The primary thing is that poor materials should have been detected and not be used.
Okay.
And that is the contractor and under the supervision and approval of the structural engineers. When the structural engineer is either not present, we assume that the design is competent. If design is incompetent and it's not detected, then there is a risk. We are carrying the risk right through the project.
Mr. Diala,
if the design, yes, please.
Does it happen, because earlier you said that all the designs are sent in to obtain approvals from government. Does it happen that the contractor or the engineers deviate from the approval which has been received from government?
Well, we are now getting into the systemic inefficiencies. The first thing is the competency or responsibility to saying somebody didn't inspect it. No. He must take responsibility for his design, and his design must be competent, whether somebody has inspected it or not. And therefore, he must be a competent professional engineer, and he must have requisite experience, and he must be able to do it competently. Now, the approval is a check, and you cannot say because the approving person didn't detect it, it's okay. However, the approval should be a second check to make sure it's better. At that level of government approval, it has the second level of inefficiency. The competence of the approving person or persons, the experience of the approving person or persons, and all the other circumstances that can surround the approving person or persons. So, The structural engineer can be incompetent, the system can be inefficient, the drawings can be wrong, the system can be adequate, incompetent, negligence. And then when these drawings get to the contractor is supposed to have enough capacity to check at a primary level that there are no obvious gaps. The contractor is not expected to redesign the building, again, because that will be like trying to design the building twice. But it's expected to be able to look through the design and ensure that there are no obvious mistakes. His experience will help him to do that. He's flipping through the drawings. Again, if he doesn't have a competent building section that can take drawings and look at them, he receives drawings, he trusts them 100%, he uses them, then the third check on the delivery system is absent. So when we say that should be a systemic improvement, we're saying that we must make sure that the design is competently done, not just checking it, but because it needs to be done properly, because that is the responsibility of the structural engineer. The check must also be competent, so when somebody has signed off, that confidence in the design should improve significantly. And if you're giving it to a good contractor, you are also relying on the fact that it's a third check, no matter how simple that third check is. That is the design phase. We then go to the construction phase, which is now 95% in the hands of the contractor. Because when the design is competently done, there are things that the contractor has responsibility for. For instance, we have form works, or what sometimes we call force work, the structure on which the rough design materials are placed. If the support structure, which is not going to be there when you're done, if the support structure has weakness, a building can fail while it is still wet because we haven't done a good scaffold, because we haven't done a good formwork, because we haven't put a proper on the ice. Sometimes before it's due for remote, we actually in the contractor's purview. While the consultants go around to inspect and make comments for its improvements, again, just like I said about the consultant, that he has a primary responsibility to design a safe building. The contractor has a primary responsibility to prepare a safe formwork. And therefore, there must be a standard to which those formwork must comply. And if it fails, then it is a failure of contracting. Then we go to the next layer of the materials that he puts on it, the workmanship, all the details that he puts there. We go to that layer, and all the quality, that the cement is good quality, that the reinforcement is good quality, the contractor is supposed to check all of this. There are stipulated tests that we should go through. The consultants should monitor them and certify them and keep record of them, but the primary responsibility is that of the contractor. Always the primary responsibility is that of the doer. The check is a safety factor. I'll pause there.
Mr. Adiola, in the case of high rises, how often does the government go to visit the site to ensure that the approvals given are being adhered to?
Okay. I will repeat myself. The responsibility for the safe construction of the site is that of the structural engineer and the contractor. Those are the people who have the primary responsibility. Government responsibility is an oversight responsibility. It's an oversight responsibility. They go there and they observe evidence. Does it look? Does it feel? But the person who looks at the reinforcement that has been laid, the concrete that has been prepared, the mix that has been done, the prop that is there, in detail, at the contractors and the structural engineers.
Yeah, but how often does government go?
Well, they don't have an obligation to come. Maybe
Okay.
that's why I'm not answering that question.
Okay.
In the construction delivery process, they come to experience substantial compliance rather than construction process.
Okay.
But so in that light now, who should be answering questions? Because information available says that two major bodies have been, of course, so many people have been speaking, but specifically the Lagos state government has said that they're going to probe. I mean, we hear this every time there is a collapse. And then we also understand that insurance brokers are saying that the building collapse is due to the negligence of contractors. So in all of these that you have heard, who should be answering what questions? I'm asking that question against the background of the question Alero just asked concerning the monitoring. At some point, the contractor was negligent, but at some point, someone should be asking questions as to whether or not the process is being followed duly.
Well, I will say that anytime a building collapses, we should first of all talk to the structural engineer and the contractor. It is the structural engineer and the contractor that are the core of the building collapse. If a plane falls from the air, we say what happened to the pilot. We don't have to say what happened to the air hostess or what happened to NAA or what happened to the airline regulation agents. We will, because they are secondary factor. But the primary factor is, was the plane maintained? Was the plane fit to fly? And was the pilot competent to fly? Those are the questions we will ask. In this particular case, we'll say, was the design done competently? Was the construction done competently? If the design is done competently and the construction is done competently, there should be no collapse, unless there is a force majeure, there's a bomb, or there's something that you didn't see coming. However, if the design is done competently and the construction is done competently, there will be no failure. And the two agencies responding for those two are the structural engineers and the contractor. Sometimes the structural engineer is not employed, is not paid, is not there. Those are external circumstances. Those should not happen. And there should be something in the system that doesn't allow a building to be built if it is not being properly, if it hasn't been properly designed, or the structural engineer is incompetent, or the contractor is incompetent. Those are the systemic ones, because the real immediate cause of failure is structural.
Now, Mr. Diala, what about the surrounding buildings? Is there any way that this collapse could have affected their integrity?
If I didn't hear that properly, you're saying that can a collapse affect the surrounding building?
Yes.
Yes. Basically, from an engineering perspective, we will say, what forces will the surrounding buildings be subjected to by virtue of this collapse? Because it's from these forces that they will have impact on them. One is the vibration.
Yeah.
There will be a huge amount of vibration. That's about the major source of impact on neighboring buildings, short of the building actually falling on it, the rubble directly falling on it. It's generally a vibration impact. At 6-7 stories, and given the location of this particular one, it is only those buildings that are within the construction space that I would imagine that they would have any potential impact. The others are fine enough that the impact should be immediate. A glass might crack, your table might shake, and things like that. Yes, it can. If it's immediately next to you, yes, it can. But in this particular case, my guess is that it's only those buildings within the immediate vicinity of the collapse that should be checked. Fortunately, they haven't reached the elements that break immediately, like windows, curtain wallings, and little things like that. They haven't reached that. But yeah, they should be checked.
Well, incidentally, to the best of my knowledge, the Lagos State government has sent out some equipment to test the integrity of some of the surrounding buildings. Let's just hope that comes to a head. But so, Engineer Adeola, now we know the Lagos State government has said that there's going to be some probing, as we have heard before. Are you optimistic that this one is going to make any significant impact to ensure this doesn't happen again in a long time? Please add that to the responsibility that the bodies of engineering practitioners have in this case.
Well, a probe is a post-mortem of a specific case. What I said at the beginning of this conversation is that we need a systemic improvement. So we should put the probe there and we should put it aside. We should constitute a team to study the whole complete chain of construction delivery, draw attentions to areas where improvements are needed. At a society level, how are young structural engineers getting their training? How many consultancy firms are there to be able to provide good, comprehensive training? How much opportunity is there? Therefore, the consultant that we are releasing into the society, how well have we trained them? What are the opportunities to train them? And how is it being done? We should go there. We should say the design process, how mandatory is it that only competent consulting firms are being used and they are being held to account for responsibilities like this? There are provisions that they must supervise these buildings. In a few cases, we've found that developers have bypassed them, have ignored them, and have just gone on, and we have not been able to detect it until there's a collapse. Then we have people who are approving them, even though there is an oversight function, who don't have the necessary experience or competencies or the time on all the things that they need to do their job. Then we have the contractors who don't have the equipment, don't have the personnel, don't have everything. So we have a systemic thing to do beyond probing this particular failure. We do need to probe every failure, because from every failure there are lessons learned. But there's a systemic inefficiency in the delivery process that is turning out frequent collapse. Like I said before, collapse will happen from time to time, but they should be far in between, and they should be minimal human error or things that are totally preventable. Basically, those are the issues. So I want more than a probe. I want a systemic evaluation of the system and a systemic design of improvement, such that at least they are far in between, and the reasons will be force majeure, things that you could not have reasonably anticipated. So I think I want more than a probe. I want a more systemic study of the construction industry to reduce the incidence of.
Apart from that, I'm sure that you would want some heads to roll so that people will begin to take their jobs seriously. Right?
Well, I'm always careful about that. As long as people have not been taking on responsibility for which they're incompetent. If you're not a structural engineer and you claim to be one, you should be punished for it. If you're a structural engineer, you have designed a building and you've been negligent, you should be punished for it. If you are a contractor and you have taken the responsibility beyond your competence, you should be punished for it. It's too easy to say, let's heads roll. In a situation where there are no laws, there cannot be sins. If there's a complete decay in the system, the first thing is to correct the decay and make people align. That would be my general approach to it.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Adeola. I'm sure that you will not blame those who have decided that they're going to stay away from high-rise buildings in Lagos for the time being. Mr. Engineer Bayo Adeola, Chairman, Comprehensive Project Management Services Limited, CPMS, and also past President, Association for Consulting Engineering in Nigeria, ACEN. Thank you very much for joining us this Saturday morning to look at this rather concerning incidents of building collapse in Lagos. Sunrise will return in just a moment with another interesting conversation. Do stay with us.